Hey guys, Ryan Earnhardt here from CreativeSoundLab.tv. Well, today I'm going to walk you through kind of my process for sound checking drums. I'm going to kind of show you where I'm at and the things that I might change and kind of the thought process behind each of those changes. How to listen to correct phase and checking for issues there, how to make decisions on adjusting mics, and just really what to listen for as you're checking drums to know if you're going down the right path. So let's check it out. This is my starting drum sound. Yeah, some solo tracks there at the end, but overall pretty good. Now, I want you to note that there's no plugins on right now. This is just raw sound. I do have the polarity flipped on a couple channels, but it's not actually flipped. I'll get to that in a second. Now, there is some gain adjustments as well, and I've done it so that the faders are pretty much in the sweet spot. You get more resolution when you're able to put your fader around 0/unity gain. So I've kind of done that just to kind of visually tidy things up, but you don't have to do that. And I'm also having an issue with one of the cables of my overheads must have gotten unbalanced somehow. Somehow it got unbalanced because it's exactly 6 dB too loud than the other side. So it'd be the left side in this case, according to my DAW. So the right side, which is balanced, is 6 dB louder. So that's a clue onto the issue. I did some cable tests. It's not the patch cable. It's got to be something else deep in my hookup. So I'm just going to say, you know what? I'll just trim it down 6 dB and move on. Just kind of some proof that, like, hey, none of us have a trouble-free session. You just kind of work with what you got and move on. Those are the Soyuz 13s, the tube version, and the Omni version. So a little bit different, and they're awfully smooth. They sound really nice. That's a spaced pair, as you saw from the video. Kind of high. I mean, I've done lower for sure. I've done higher, so maybe a medium. But that's a really nice sound. Equidistant from that snare. So one of the things that I like to check is I'll go ahead and go to mono whenever I'm doing critical listening. I go to the mono, and in mono you should be able to hear the cancellation better. So let's see here. This all looks fairly well matched. Let's see how the snare sounds if I run one of them out of polarity. So you notice the snare was canceled, the high tom was canceled, but then that floor tom, that's actually much closer to that other mic. So now that's why you're hearing more room on the snare mic. And that's a clue, okay? But what I'm really listening for is the fullness. This is really the main purpose of getting polarity right, is that fullness of the snare. See if I loop it. So that's what I'm listening for, the fullness. I'm talking about 200 hertz, maybe 300. It's just that fullness of sound. Now, if it's out of phase, then you're going to get some kind of boxiness sound. And depending on your monitors, it might fake you out that, maybe that sounds fuller. But I usually go for the lowest option, except for kick. If it goes really deep, then it's not very helpful. It's not that helpful of a low end that would really cut through a mix. So there is some limits to this. But I mostly focus on the low end. Do I get the fullness out of the kick, the fullness out of the snare? Every time that you're comparing these, you want to have the level match. So I'll show you what I mean. We heard it on overheads here. We heard a big difference. Okay, really, really obvious. Let's move on and let's compare it against the snare. So we're gonna leave these alone. We like it how it is. And what we're gonna do is pull up the snare track until we can start to hear it. And what we're doing is we're taking the loudness of the snare on the overheads. Let's say it's right here, whatever this means. And we're gonna raise the loudness of the close mics to that same level of right there. And then when we flip the polarity on one, it'll cancel out. If we have different levels, we'll flip the polarity and it'll subtract a little bit, but it won't be as obvious. So we want a level match. There's so much low end in this already. I mean, that's the benefit of having good phase relationships, is there's just more low end that you know what to do with. And so as you mix, you kind of shave a little off, clean it up, clean up some of the mud. You know, you're kind of taking away the fullness. So this is what your raw tracks want to sound like, is nice and full sounding. And I see right about, I don't know, -6 or so. I don't know why it's not displaying the numbers here. Okay, so it's a little tough. It's a little tough to hear. And my first instinct would be that if I'm using a single stereo mic on the kit, or like an ORTF pair where it's just one boom stand, I'd maybe lower or raise the boom stand by about 3 or 4 inches and see if that relationship gets a little more polarizing, a little more obvious when you make the switch. Because you want to make sure you're on the right side of this. You want to make sure that it's working, not just halfway working. And so if I'm not quite hearing it, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's just not quite lining up. And so it might be an overhead height issue. That does work. I've tested this. You know, it's all there. It definitely works. So experiment with the height. But here, I want you to listen to what this actually is doing to the sound. There's a specific frequency that I'm hearing. That knocking frequency. That's the frequency. That's the one that you want to be looking out for. So, it's a weirdness in the mids is kind of what it translates to. It's not going to be on the, it could be on the fundamental. If it's really strong, if it's like perfectly in phase and all this, and then you flip the polarity, yeah, it's going to be really strong. But in kind of a real world situation, you're just going to hear kind of a knocking sound, some weirdness in the low mids. So that was what, like 500? Yeah. So that's one thing to check. And so we have the snare. We might experiment with the position on the snare. I'm not sure that I like it. It is pretty close. It's pretty close. But let's follow through with the kind of the principle of phase and polarity. And by the way, phase relates to time, polarity relates to up or down. So instead of the wave starting out by going up and then down when the drum gets hit, it actually, when you reverse the polarity, it goes down first and then up. So it's almost like adding -5 to +5. What do you get? The sum of both is 0 because it's negative and positive 5. That's what we're doing when we cancel out. That's how the null test works, is we're taking +10, -10. What do you get? 0. And if it's +10, -11, then you actually can hear that it's -1. You can hear the difference in a null test. So we're kind of doing that. We're creating a null test to see where things actually line up. And we can hear that pretty clearly. It's probably one of the more obvious things. And when it's really off, like in those overheads, you could hear it's like, whoa. All of a sudden, you just hear the room on that snare. So it's really obvious. It's very clear. It's a great way to check things. So with snare, I usually go and just solo it and listen to the bottom. Okay, I think this is off. So one thing that I do is I'll pull up the bottom mic, because this, I'm listening to the low end, I'm not listening to the high end sizzle. And I'm trying to match the amount of low end and make that equal to the close mic. So I'm going to just pull up, in other words, I'm just going to pull up the top mic until I can start to hear it. That's what that means. Okay, and that gets you about the fullness equal on both parts. Now we should be able to hear it if we flip that polarity. Big difference, okay? Big difference. If I didn't do that, let's see. There's still a big difference there. To the trained ear, there's a big difference. To the untrained ear, you could probably get away with that and EQ your way out of that issue. I mean, you're going to get phase shift when you EQ, and there's been many people that have worked with that, right? But when you level match the low end and you know what you're listening for and how to gauge your tracks, now you know it's good as it can be, at least. And this is just the idea of you're getting the most out of your raw tracks. And we haven't even touched plugins yet. I mean, I have this EQ to show you what to listen for, but that doesn't even count. So then what I do is kick against overheads. Again, we're going to just go with mono because it's just easier to hear. Again, I'm just pulling it up until I can start to hear the mic. That's just a nice way of level matching that low end of the overheads that's there in the close mic. Another way you could do this is flip it the way you think is wrong, level match that, and then flip it back and see if it gets dramatically louder. So it takes, it takes a good bit longer. I'm at negative like 1.5. And before, let's see here. Flip. Big difference there. So I'm at negative like 1.5 here, but now let's try to like level match the low end and see just the difference in how much volume is getting sucked out of not having a good phase relationship. I don't know, -5.5, -6, but 4 or 5 dB easily from having good phase relationships. Again, there's so much you can do almost by anti-mixing. And we haven't even gotten into the phase plugins of scooting tracks slightly this way or that way. Okay, there's so much that can be done. So that's just with the kick. Then again, I check against the sub kick, or just the sub or out kick mic. We could cover that real quick. You hear that difference there? Big difference. Here's the kick out mic that's flipped. Yeah, so big difference there. I'm not listening to the deepness of the kick. That's not the point. I'm listening to that kind of knockiness, that weird kind of mids that are in the kick when it's flipped the wrong way. The weird mids. Okay, so real quick, I want to make sure I was clear on this. Sometimes in real life, it's pretty hard to hear the effects of bad phase relationships. And sometimes the best way to hear it is to train yourself to listen to weird stuff in the mids. I mentioned the frequencies around 4 and 500. So that's one application and how you can kind of alert yourself to issues. And maybe you should go back and check your phase relationships. Point number 2 is that for kick, it is all about the low end. You just want to make sure that you're getting the low end in the right way. So don't just have your mics cancel out one another to create this artificial low end. You really want that punch. You want it to really have a full sound where all your mics are working together. And then what you'll do is later on, or further down in your signal chain, you can cut out some of the frequencies that are distracting to you, that keep you from appreciating the deep, rich lows. So you can reduce the 100 hertz, reduce 150, reduce, big cuts, 2, 3, 400. But it's important to have your mics working together. That's where we're at right now. So don't get distracted just because if we flip polarity on one of these mics, all of a sudden we have this deep, like sub 808 bass. It may sound cool, but it's much better to get your mics working together, and then you can shape your tone with some EQ. So now we know that's correct, so we can just kind of mix it into taste. That's interesting, if you flip the snares, and I flip them both at the same time, obviously, because they have to be apart from one another. So they come as a pair. But in the mix, it seems like it goes better this way. So, it's one of those things where, yes, there are rules, but if the rules don't work, then who cares, Same thing with toms. Check that high tom here. Real obvious, okay? Again, it's about level matching. So start with your overheads. That's the key to your good drum sound, is your overheads. It gives you a sense of the big picture. You can always dip the overheads down later. You don't even have to use them, But it's going to ensure that everything is kind of the way it should be on your close mics. It's kind of a proof. It's a check. If anything, it's kind of it's like an outline in pencil that you can erase later after you've painted in the picture. So that's really the starting point, is the overheads. So that's high tom. Let's hear the low tom. So the main thing we want to hear is just a difference. We want to make sure that we have a good option. We don't want to have two mediocre options. We want it to be polarized here. We want it to make sure that we're hearing a difference. Sometimes on this floor tom, it's hard to hear. I got lucky this time, and it makes me look like this is easy. It's really not easy. You know, the floor tom is the hardest thing to really hear the difference in, okay? And I just happened to get lucky on this time. But you can clearly hear how the low end is there and then it's not. And it's this weird knocky sound in the mids. Let's evaluate some of these actual drum sounds and see what we might change. So this is just overheads. Man, that's such a great sound. I'm very impressed with those mics. The preamps also, Focusrite ISA preamps. So these are the 828s Mark II, but all the ISA stuff I really like. So that's what's on these overheads. So with that, we just fill in the sound. So here's a close mic fader with all the close mics on it. Okay, and if we want to, we could dip the overheads down and clean it up a little bit, make it more direct. And then we also have a room mic. We also should check the phase polarity of this room. Okay. Just go ahead and make it a little wider, dip down the center channel just a little bit. So there's some kind of like anti-mixing plugins that you can use, like channel mixing, like this Air Windows plugin here. You know, it's kind of mixing, but it's not like actually putting on EQ and compression. So we're just kind of combining things in a different way, just like flipping the polarity or scooting around the phase. So one thing I think I might want to change is maybe try to get some more attack out of this kick mic here. I mean, that's a pretty good sound, but I seem to always want more attack. And in the context of the mix, it's almost like, you know, non-existent. You solo it, you hear it, but that's why you don't solo, because it tells you nothing. You really got to hear it in the context. That's one thing I would change. The other thing I'd change is the snare top mic. It is very close. It reminds me of like a live sound kind of thing. I'd like to open it up a little bit. So maybe pull the snare mic up and maybe back, just kind of give it some space from the drum. I think maybe that floor tom could be adjusted slightly. It seems to get too much of the mids. So maybe aim it a little more toward the center of the drum. It's just like the 12th fret of the guitar, you know? That is going to be, you know, the center, fundamental lowest note vibrating, you know, right in the center. It's just math. And the more harmonic stuff is out towards the edges. So aim the mic a little bit more towards the center, maybe move it in a little bit. Maybe move it a little closer, and that might work. One thing we haven't checked out is the hi-hat. So that mic is also double checked with the phase relationship. Yep. So make sure to not flip that, and we're good to go. You know, no matter what you think it's recording, there's always some bleed. And if you can get in a situation where the bleed isn't fighting the direct sound of other drums, your drum sound is just going to slowly compound on itself and get fuller and stronger and just meaner sounding. I mean, it's going to be a huge drum sound. Always go down to mono to listen. But yeah, it's a great tip. Another kind of rule that I follow, it's not a hard fast rule because we have stuff like the crotch mic and other mics that don't exactly follow this. But for the most part, we have basically 3 different distances in drum recording. We have close, we have overheads, and then we have room. So close is going to be 6 inches or less. The medium is going to be your overheads, so that'll be, 3 feet to 6 feet maybe, depending on if your room's really controlled and you can do it. 3 to 6 feet. Usually, I'm 6 feet high, and it's usually eye level for me, my overheads, when I'm standing behind the kit. So it's, it's not crazy high, but it's not low enough to where I'm going to hit the mic. And then the room mics, that's kind of your FAR. So you have 3 different layers. Your room mics really could be kind of close to the kit, but they'd need to null out the kit. So you could do like a ribbon mic and face it side to side so it nulls out the drums. And that'll sound great, actually. You could also do some 57s. Just point them out away from the kit and cancel out the drums behind them in the cardioid null that pattern, that polar pattern. So you could do that. Again, check polarity because it will matter. All these little things do matter. But yeah, those are your 3 layers. And if you stick to those 3 layers, you're probably going to be okay. Start out with the middle layer, fill it in, and then you add in your FAR layer, the room mics, for a little icing on top. So let's make those adjustments to the drums, and let's have another go at this. Yeah, it's just a different voicing, really, of that kick. Yeah, so that's a little difference, but it'll go a long way because there's less woofy low end, I guess. It's weird to say that you don't want that much low end in a kick, but yeah, I mean, you're dialing down the lows, which means you're dialing up the attack. So with this, you want to make sure that you're level matching. It's really close, but I might just bump it up a little bit. Yeah, it's just got some like honk, like some honkiness that comes from being real close to the drum. So with that snare top mic, just pulling it back a little bit really helps. Listen to this floor tom. Yeah, so a little bit more attack. There's less of those mids, and it's definitely more punchy on the lows. Yeah, so it's a little bit more punchy on those lows. So I think that sounds nice. Let's hear it in the context. And sometimes the difference, the subtle differences, are more audible in the context because you have to be able to see what is able to survive and compete against the other tracks. If it's able to survive and still come through a little bit, then you'll see it poking out and be like, ooh, I see that difference there. So it's counterintuitive. Just a little more woolly sounding, a little more muffled sounding. Here's take two, the adjusted take. Yeah, pretty crazy. I mean, it's like... Is the hi-hat louder for some reason? No? Maybe I played the hi-hat louder, but you can still hear the difference. That's more of a stereo image thing. Just know the hi-hat's probably being played louder. But the difference in tone is there, and that's what we wanted. We wanted more punch from the kick, more clarity out of the snare, more clarity out of that floor. The low mids, we pulled the mic in to get more of the fundamental and actually pulled it in closer to the center of the drum. See, I'm hearing kind of a weirdness in the stereo image. I think if I'm playing the hi-hat loud, it kind of is more obvious to me. I'm so used to the Bloom line and basically the easiness and perfection of it that you can really hear kind of the wideness of the spaced pair here. These are actually the omnis for the overheads. So they're super smooth sounding. They sound amazing. But that's just something to consider. You know, it's not as cohesive of a stereo image as something like a Bloom line, XY, or TF, kind of the methods that I've given over the years for the no-fail drum recording technique. But yeah, overall, that's a pretty strong sound. Now let's go ahead and add a little EQ. And this is going to be aggressive. Okay, this is going to trying to sound like it's, you know, mixed. Okay, so we're just taming those low mids, 200 to 500 hertz. We could try to solve it by boosting our way out of it. Okay, and that could work, but also consider that if we just reduce what we don't like, we don't have to boost the high end at all. So never forget that reducing the low end is the same as boosting the high end. In terms of balance, it's definitely not the same as far as the procedure, but if you need to balance out the track to make it sound more clear, there's different ways you can approach the issue. And it's much better to reduce something in EQ than to boost it. And a lot of times I'll say that, like, to boost it is really to add the flavor. To reduce it is to fix the issue. So usually we'll go through and actually reduce first. And if I really can't fix the issue, then I'll go through and see, okay, is it the mic issue, right? So a lot of times I'll do test recording and just make sure that I like how stuff is working out. The best way to do it is to fix it at the mic, and we've done that so far. So, yeah, overall, just kind of get a sense of what these drums sound like, a little bit of EQ on the main. I mean, these sound pretty solid, I think. A lot of times there's some hidden low end in that bottom mic. It's a real nice way to kind of create this kind of aggregate effect of fullness on that snare. I mean, you know, we've done the work, right? We've done the work on the mics, and now I'm literally just doing a couple different things. Barely anything, okay? Like, this does not have to be hard. You do not need more than a couple plugins on each track if it's a great track. Okay, again, you know, you got to mix it at the mic, not at the plugin, okay? Don't fix it in the mix. Fix it at the mic. That's the phrase. Okay. Toms. And sometimes I will solo something just to see, like, what is the raw element going on here. There's plenty of low end there, you know? I might just add a little smidge of some top. Same thing with the floor. Yeah, you know, I mean, that's just with the EQ. This is not compression. This is actually kind of the opposite of what I usually do. I usually start with compression, and through the process of bringing things up and making the tracks compete with each other as you compress, they start to interfere, and it exposes issues. So I'm not trying to do too much at once. Just a little bit at each stage. Get some of this weirdness out. Part of that weirdness is what makes the kick work in a mix, though. So you don't want to totally just, you know, neuter it. You see, you're already hearing it's almost sounding bigger, and that's because the compression is squashing it, making it a little bit longer in sound. Then it makes it sound bigger. Your ear can hear and appreciate those low frequencies more. Well, we're not actually like EQing the crap out of the low end, jacking up 60 hertz. The compressor actually does that for us, and it starts to sound more of like a deep sound. It just has like a roar to it. Here's without compression. See, it just sounds punchy. It sounds short. With compression, you know, it sounds a little longer, a little more contained. Let's move on to snare here. Snare can be a funny thing. Sometimes I like to kill the transient. Sometimes I would hate to do that. So let's check this out. You know, one of my favorites actually is this guy here. If you want a really compressed sound that kills the transient, if not, maybe go for something like this. So yeah, there's probably a few other things I might do to this. Obviously, you know, compress the toms, but I mean, the sound of the toms sound freaking awesome. I mean, that's the tom mic by Loughton Audio, and the snare top is the snare mic by Loughton Audio. So that's what you're hearing: snare top, and then the small tom and the floor tom. Bottom mic is SM57. Kick mic is Bear Dynamic M88 TG. The sub, so-called sub, is actually a kick-out mic. The Soyuz 023 bomblet with no pad, but then the pad after the mic. Overheads, Soyuz 13's tube with the Omni capsule. The hi-hat is the Bear Dynamic M201 TG. And the room is the AEA R88A for active. Tom mics were going into the AEA preamps because I'm kind of testing those out, give it something real clean. The AEA is actually going to the Focusrite Claret Plus preamps, just the interface stock plugin preamp. And everything else was the Focusrite. Actually, the kick out was the Weight Tank WT72. So yeah, let me know what you think. This was fun, you know, just walking through my thought process, you know, different stuff that I might like to try, how much you can do with so little, you know. I've went to friends' houses and there's like 8 or 9 plugins on each track, okay? So there's a lot going on there, and it doesn't have to be that way. It can be that your tracks are very easy to mix, and it's just a matter of just finessing the sound and making it better instead of fixing issues and trying to dig yourself out of a hole. So let me know what you think of this. I'll be hanging out in the comments below.